get started. We're missing a couple people. Sometimes you don't know if they're running late or they won't show up. So this is about the time we actually start, a little after 7. Okay, before we get started with the class, let me just kind of explain why we have these sheets that in front of you. One is the outline just to help you follow along the presentation. That's one. And the other one is a list of these colors. And you want to keep this throughout the whole class because you will go back and refer to these for being able to understand what we mean when we say, or these are like one of the outlines, some of them we're calling them healthy thoughts and beliefs, colors that represent that. And without knowing what the color means, you won't be able to decide whether it's positive or it's negative. And that's why we have it like that. And then it's always good to have the book because a lot of the things we talk about, they're already here. So if you read ahead, you'll be able to understand this a lot better than if you read with us because we won't be reading page after page and word for word, but sometimes we will do that. So today, this actually starts on page 22. Okay. So, but I'm going to start with the story on page 23. Why? Yes. 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 Okay. Yeah, we are going to be on this chapter 1. I think it's for next time we'll probably go to chapter 3, which is page 27. So it'll be good to read that 27 to 33 for next time. Okay. So, like I said, we'll start here. Page 22 is where we start today, but I'm going to start with 23 because there's a story there. The reason why I use these stories is because they make this very practical. You can see actually somebody else like us who was exhibiting the issues or the problems that we are tackling when we start talking about healthy thoughts and the health and beliefs, how to deal with those. Because we don't always have the healthy thoughts or beliefs. And sometimes this is where most human beings struggle. Now, in Christianity, you probably have heard a lot of books talking about how to manage your mind or keep captive your thoughts, or The Better of the Mind is another very famous book. And all those books, they are really trying to address the same issues that we find in our lesson today. So the story on chapter 23, page 23, is this young man that came to see me. In order to understand him, you have to understand where he was coming from in terms of his spiritual background, his upbringing, the influences that influenced his life. Because what happens with Randy is that when it came to the love of God, God loving him, he had some real problems. He opened his talking to me about how upset he was with God because God was playing favorites with people. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, wherever I look, my friends, God is blessing them. But he's not blessing me, which means God must love them more than he loves me. And the way he was measuring God's blessings was all on material things. He would give examples like, my friend drives an expensive car and I don't. Or some people, when they get prosperous, they have these big houses and I don't. Uh, if I am sick and I pray for healing, I have to go to the doctor because God doesn't heal me miraculously like He does others. So why is He doing this? Okay. One of the problems that I saw that Randy was raised and brought up in a church that really, today we may call it prosperity gospel kind of a church that actually teaches these things. That if God is with you, you should have these things. I remember when I first came to this country many years ago, I visited a church in Farmers Branch, and the preacher was actually talking about how to know that God is blessing you. And he was one of those very fiery kind of preachers. And he said, if you have just one Cadillac, you need to make sure you increase your faith so you have 2 or 3 or 4. If you have just one house, if you really have faith, you should pray for more. So the whole thing was really based on material kinds of things, which is one of the problems he had. So as we were talking together with him, it came out that, as you can see in the story, it came out that what he had based his beliefs was because he was taught things that were not correct. So his beliefs were leading him to expect these other things. Because the part of the brain that we're talking about today, it's called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is where our beliefs are, and we touched on this last time. Not only our beliefs there, this is where our thoughts, the way we think, is in this part of the brain. And also, this is the part of the brain that contains all our memories of all the experiences we have had since we were little. It's kind of like a computer that keeps all these experiences. Now, why is that important? Because you want to be able to remember them or to recall them when you need them. Kind of what happens if you're in school. At the end of the semester, or sometimes even before, you have to take a test or a quiz. In order to pass that, you have to be able to recall those things. Some of us here may have family members who have had dementia or who have had Alzheimer's, where their ability to remember diminishes. My own mother had that, and we knew something was wrong, even though most of my siblings didn't know why, but I understood what it was. Because she would go to her church, which was less than a mile from her house, and she'd go into that church all her life. But sometimes she would come up and she would pass by her house. And when she gets about a mile down the road, there's some shops there. And she would say, I'm trying to go to my house. Where is my house? And they would say, oh, Mrs. Mungadze, no, you passed your house. So they will lead her back to her house. Because part of that part of the brain for her was beginning to die, the part of the hippocampus, the bottom part of it. Because that is where all the memories get in there. So how do then those memories affect the way we believe or the way we think? Because a memory is how people build a belief system. You believe something because of the experiences you have had. If the experiences were very negative, chances are you are going to develop some very negative beliefs. And those negative beliefs, as they go around the part of the brain before they get your conscious mind, as we talked about last week, now that part of the brain is beginning to interpret every new experience based on the previous experiences. The problem with that is that does not always correspond correctly. Last week we talked about a little baby, right? A little baby sees this flame and thinks it's very interesting. So he or she goes to touch it. Realize you can't touch it. But what it does, it touches you, it burns your fingers. And the baby just cries because it's hurt. Doesn't know what it is, but knows what it does. So next time you take that candle and says, "Here the candle," and the little baby usually shies away, doesn't want to be wiped because that experience has taught that part of the brain, hey, that thing hurts, so don't touch it. So the baby now is changing their behavior because of what they've seen there. So how would we know then if that part of the brain for us is working the way it should? It help us. It's not giving us problems like what was happening with our friend here in the book. Well, if you look at this story, one of the problems that was happening here is that when he was growing up, when Randy was growing up, his father actually favored his older brother over him. Well, you can see what's happening here. We say, Heavenly Father, our Father in heaven. I've heard the saying, I'm sure some of you have heard it, when people say, the view of your earthly father sometimes becomes your view of your heavenly father. This is what's happening with Randy. So Randy transferred his relationship with his father to his relationship with God. So now he's saying, just like my father favored my brother, so God is favoring all these other brothers I have and overlooking me. So when you look at the end of the story, what I did with him was try to help him change the way he believes, because you can't change the experiences that he had. Now on page 22, there's a list. Instead of typing it for you, I just thought we can just look at it in the book. These 9 things are not an exhaustive list at all, but these are examples of some of the struggles that we can have if there's something not working well with our hippocampus. Distorted thinking would cause us to perceive reality inaccurately. This is a water bottle. If someone had very bad intentions and put something real bad in this, right, and I open it and I drink it, I am assuming this is water, and I drink it, it's not water. If I don't process this correctly, what might happen to me is that if you hand me another bottle of water like this, I'll refuse it. And go like, no, I'm not drinking that. You say, well, why is it water? I said, no, it's not water. When I drank this last time, it made me sick, so I'm not going to drinking this. This is what happens. So when we are examining this, these colors that you put in that part of the brain on your brain map is telling you this is how you think. This is where your beliefs are. And those beliefs are actually based on some of the memories that are in your brain, even some of the memories you don't remember. They are in there. Okay. So I divided these colors in categories just to make it easier for us to go over. The first group, I call these the healthy thoughts and beliefs. What does that mean? It means thoughts that do not harm you in any way, thoughts that don't mislead you. We call those healthy thoughts, or beliefs that are congruent with what you're wanting to do. For example, if you're wanting to be liked by people, if you have one of those, either of those number number one group, yellow, blue, purple, and red. If you have one of those in that part of the brain, your chances of thinking correctly are higher than if you have the following list. Why? If you look on your other sheet, the your other sheet would tell you it would tell you why that is. For example, the first color that I mentioned there, I said, well, yellow is a good color to have there. Why is that? Well, the color yellow, when your brain chooses that crayon, your brain is telling you that you have what we call happy thoughts or very positive thoughts. And in part of the research that I did, this was the predominant color that you find in Christians, which makes us believe that it's what we call God-influenced way of thinking. There's another study that I did what I wanted to see what a preacher's hippocampus look like. Okay. And the group that I took, the majority of those preachers really had yellow in there, which was consistent with the way they think, the way they believe as preachers that are preaching the Word of God. But some of them didn't. Even though they had one of those four up there, what did it mean then if they didn't have yellow? It didn't mean that they didn't have faith. It meant that their beliefs were based on something else. For example, if their part was blue, normally the color blue is found in the brain to combat anxiety. Anxiety is one of those things we see in this group number 2, where it's the orange. What is anxiety? Anxiety means excessive worry. Even though the worry may be warranted, but it's there, which means constantly, you're constantly worrying, constantly not sure what's going to happen. So those thoughts, I've heard people say, boy, my mind doesn't shut down. It's running even when I'm trying to sleep. Whenever you hear people say my mind, they're literally talking about this part of the brain, the hippocampus. So blue is trying to calm the mind so that it doesn't worry. And blue, for some reason, it tends to make people's minds, human beings' minds, relax. This is one of the reasons what happens when people go on the water. Or if people are fishing, they're staring on the water. And one of the reasons why we love the blue seas, the blue waters, because it really does calm our brain. The other thing that the blue color also represents is a very soothing protection that we use to protect ourselves from any outside influences that are very negative. If blue was a person, that would be the kind of a person who is very protective of themselves as well as being protective of other people. And that's what we see with the color blue. So if blue is in there, that's someone who doesn't have these anxious thoughts, someone who thinks calmly, someone who is steady and does not fluctuate like what happens with the other colors that we will mention. Purple in there is another color that's a good color to have in that part of the brain. Why? Because purple is the concentration of our intellect. When we talk about intelligence, IQ, being very strong-minded, strong-willed, all those words describe the color purple. And sometimes without talking to people and they show me maybe I see this, I may say something like, oh, you really have a strong mind or a strong will. And they laugh at me and go like, how did you know? Everybody complains that I'm just impossible. I'm going like, well, I'm not so sure about impossible. I think it just they have a very strong mind. It's not a bad thing. But as you see, when we start talking about other parts of the brain, that good, strong mind we see on group one purple is not a good thing if we see purple like in another part of the brain, because it brings a different impact on that part of the brain. So then the other one is red. Now, red is a very important color to talk about. Why? Because this is the essence of the human life. What does that mean? As human beings, I mean, we eat and we drink, we do all these things to actually thrive in our physical existence. And the color red represents all that. That's why sometimes if someone shows me their brain map and there is no red anywhere in their brain at all, I immediately start suspecting this person is not having fun. This person is not really living their life fully. There are some other things in their mind that are going on where maybe they're just existing, or they're just functioning, or they're just surviving, because we don't see the color. That means they have all their passions, they are happy, they are free, they want to relate to other people, they are not isolating, they are not running away from life. So that's what that means there. Now, those four colors are not the only ones you will find in this part of the brain. You may find in that part of the brain the other colors that we're going to mention now. If you have a color in there that is not mentioned at all, before we finish, maybe when we take our short break, let me know so I can go over that one too, because we don't want you not to have any meaning that is important to you. So number 2, these are negative thoughts and beliefs. Yes. There. Yeah. Okay. So one of the reasons why the number 2 is, it's not more important than the number 1, but it's important. Why? Because this is where a lot of the problems, the issues we have as people with our thoughts come from this, from the second group of these colors. The black color, this comes from, if you look at that list, this comes from a lot of trauma, such as what we call verbal trauma. Verbal trauma is when we either exposed or grow up around a lot of yelling or physical abuse or extreme neglect. This is what caused the color black. And in it, because of these traumas that we're talking about, there can be thoughts or angry thoughts, very negative thoughts. Also, they can be what we call self-harm, thoughts of ending one's life or just self-abuse and things like that. People who may struggle with destructive things such as either eating disorder or anything that's really harming the body, usually it's mentioned, it's represented by the black color. What I've seen, over the 30 some years I've done this, is when I see that color in this part of the brain, I know that it doesn't matter what we do with this person. If we don't change the way they think, these things won't go away, because those thoughts will continue to generate what ends up being the behavior. People, all of us, what we believe determines what we do. If you believe that if you speed down the road, you get a ticket, you try very hard not to do that. But if you don't believe it, you keep getting bunches of tickets until they take away your license. Uh, so one of the reasons why that color in here is at the bottom of this hippocampus there, at the place where I said is where the memories are, there will be experiences, very bad experiences, that are telling that part of the brain that this is sure going to happen again, or it's going to happen all the time, or this is what life is about. Uh, Once you start talking to somebody with that part of the brain, it becomes very obvious. Actually, I talked to somebody today who just said, all I remember all my life, I always knew that I wasn't good enough. And she says, and I also knew that I didn't deserve to live. And then she says, yeah, I've tried numerous times to kill myself, numerous times. And says, well, every time I failed, I ended up in the psych hospital many, many, many times. And nothing has changed. And I started having this conversation with her and said, okay, we need to find out what happened to you that you keep in your memories that told you that, yeah, you're not good enough, you deserve to die. And that's when she started talking about the things that happened to her as a child that actually brought those things there. So that's one. Now, the other one, which is that's one of the things that many, many people, including clinicians or therapists, don't know about, is the color gray. Or the color gray, you don't find it a lot in people's brains. When people find it here, what that means is that this negativity we're talking about now has an element of it, what I consider a spiritual element, to where it's almost like there is a force that's actually pushing this. The best way I can explain this to you is to just give you examples of people that maybe you may have heard of, or people that we all know. Most believers, most church people, they have heard of a story in the Bible, Mark chapter 5. In the story, there was a family man in the village with his family, and he had what we could call a condition in which he would become very, very violent, and but never towards anybody else except himself. And when that would happen, he would take anything he could find to cut himself. And he knew when this would come on to him. So he would tell the people in the village that, I know that's about to happen. So please tie my hands and my legs, just tie me so that when this happens, I don't do that. So at first people would say, oh, sure. And then they would tie him up and they would see him try to wrestle. Sometimes he would break those ropes and continue to go and hurt himself. And then people says, hey, this is not helping. And he says, well, maybe we'll use chains, things very strong that I won't be able to break it. And they did that too. It didn't work. And finally, he figured out, hey, the only thing I can do right now, take myself out of the community and go live in the woods. Well, if you live in the woods, I mean, there are other things there that can hurt you. So in his mind, he thought, I'll just go to the graveyards. At least it's clear. No, nothing will hurt me there. So the people in the village, they would hear him many nights in the graveyard, screaming loudly and cutting himself. So one morning, Jesus and his disciples, they were walking, going to wherever they were going. Now, if you know anything about some of those cultures, they walk in these little paths. I came from a culture like that where you look in this path about this wide. So you walk in a single line like this. And so he saw them. And everybody knew who Jesus was and what he could do. So this guy decided, hey, this is my chance. So he runs over there to Jesus to say, please, I know you help people, even people like me. But he couldn't get that word out. Instead, something spoke through his mouth and said to Jesus, what do you have to do with us, Son of God? We know who you are. And Jesus, well, who are you? He said, well, my name is Legion because we are many. And if you know the story, there was a confrontation there between Jesus and the things that were in this man. And those things that were in this man is what I call the gray. In this day and age, I see this. I don't want to say I see this all the time. I see this way too many times. But the people with the gray don't always act out like that. They call them the men of the tombs in the Bible. Many times, all those things just happen inside. There's no outward example. So one of my concerns is that in the Western church, when I say Western church, I mean the church in Eastern and Western Europe and the United States and many other places where they have no exposure to things like this. They don't think it happens at all. In fact, something that has happened to me over and over again since I've been here is that when people see somebody who they think this is maybe happening, they call me up and they say, hey, we need to send you somebody. And I say, okay, what's the problem? Well, we know you're from Africa. You know about these things. As if these things exclusively, live in Africa and they don't live here. Okay. So the biggest problem with the gray color when it's in there, and you also have the black or all these other negative colors, it just makes it worse. It makes it really produce even more symptoms or more problems. So that's what we mean by that when it's in that part of the brain. So when it's in there, what do people do? Well, they have to find out why is it there? Where did it come from? And usually when this is going on, I advise people, if they're believers, they go to their church. I suggest that they go talk to their pastor about it. Most pastors would know what to do. If they don't, they usually know somebody else who does. I mean, since I've been in this area, a few times I've been called by a church saying, can you come over here and help us what's happening? So I go over there, I realize that's what's happening. Sometimes what they're doing is counterproductive. I remember one time I went to a very well-known church here in Grand Prairie, and I got there, and there was people in a room like this after the service, and they were all kneeling on the floor, and they were holding this lady down, and I could tell that some of them were actually having carpet burns on their knees because they were trying to keep her down, and they're trying to cast out something. And I got there, and I looked at the lady, and I realized that yes, she was there, but she wasn't there. In her eyes, I knew that this is not. So I assumed, I didn't have any time to do my normal evaluation. I assumed there must be something that happened to her. Why would she do this? So, and I sat down on the floor and I looked at her and I said, can you tell me what's happening? Because I spoke so softly and I wasn't one who was holding her down, I could see her blinking. I knew what was happening. She was shifting in her mind, and she looked at me and with a little girl's voice, and she said, I'm scared of these people. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. What are they doing? They're holding me down. And I said, well, I'm here now. They won't hold you down. I'm going to ask them not to do that. So I turned around to one of the men there who seemed to be maybe one of the leaders. And I said, can we get everyone out of this room? And he was looking at me like, are you nuts? We cannot do that. And I said, just let those two ladies stay. And especially you guys, you just need to leave. And they went outside. And the lady sat and looked at me and said, are you gonna hurt me? I said, no, that's why I'm sitting down here. Why? I think you've been hurt enough. We don't want to do that. And then she began talking about what had happened to her, the traumas. So what had happened to her was that because of these traumas that happened to her, her family were practicing witchcraft, and she was raised in it. And some forms of witchcraft literally involve the grays in their religion. So this is where that came from. So there was no way that these grays were going to leave because she had parts of her that thought the grays were help to her. So that's why in this part of the brain, each one of these colors, we really have to pay attention to them. You know, you may not have it, but if you have maybe a family member or a friend or somebody who, because some people, what happens to you, I'm sure it'll happen to some of you, is you take your map and you're talking to some friends, whatever, and they're going like, oh, I want to do that. Or they may say, they'll do this, and you look and you see that gray in there, you're going like, uh-oh. And they may ask, oh, so what do I do with this? Not everybody says, well, you know what, we'll refer you to that therapist or somebody, or some people start talking about it, which is not a bad idea. But you need to understand a little bit of what's going on for you to be able to know how to help. So the other color there is the orange. This is a very common one, especially during the pandemic and now. Why? Because the pandemic brought a lot of anxiety to people. We talked about this here at our conference several months ago. The problem with that kind of anxiety, most of the time, it does not make sense. I talked to a young man a couple of days ago struggling with this thing. So he is on vacation, they're traveling, they're doing nothing threatening at all. And all of a sudden, his head tells him, you are going to die. You are going to have a heart attack and drop dead right now. And he was very, very, very scared. But his dear wife, who knows the history, and says, no, you're not dying. We've gone to the emergency room 2-3 times, and the doctors said it's a panic attack. You have a good heart. There's no reason why to do this. It didn't make sense. He kept saying, oh, I'm being told in my head, yeah, if you just let up a little bit, you're going to die. You're going to leave your wife and your small baby. To most of us, when we hear that, we go like, how can that be? I mean, how can it be? It happens. Some people, it's not so much about dying. For some people, it's like something terrible is going to happen, even when there is no reason to think that at all. And when it comes to a panic attack, I know how that feels because I had one when I was in college. My idea in college was I didn't want to spend 4 years in college. For some reason, I got it in my head that I need to do it only in 2. So in order to do it in 2, I had to take double the courses. At first, the school said, well, we don't allow you. And I kept begging them. And they said, well, you have to prove to us that you can pass the courses with good grades. So I said, okay. So the full load was 18 hours, I think, or 15 hours. I took 18. I think I had only 1 B on there. So to them, that meant, well, you can do it. So that to me was a stamp of approval. So now I'm taking 28, 22. And I did everything. Of course, I couldn't do what the other students, including Cindy and them, I couldn't do what other students did. They went to movies. I couldn't go to movies because I had too much work to do. Summer school, I went to summer school. I was studying all the time, writing papers. My whole motto was, when it comes to exams, I'm the one to finish all my homework. I was not behind. What I didn't know was that I was stressing myself to the max. I had no idea. I never heard of this before. So the day when I finished everything, I handed all my papers and everything else. The only thing that was left was to order my gown and cap. Something that should make you happy. So I went to my room, and my roommate had just come in, and I'm sitting on my bed, and I couldn't breathe. I started hyperventilating. I really thought I was going to die. So I told him, please call the ambulance, I'm going to die. And he calls the dorm parent, and they come in and they call 911. And before I know it, I really thought, boy, I'm going to die in a foreign country where my family is not here, my mama is not here. And they come in, and the first thing they do is they put the oxygen pill on my mouth, and I could breathe. Now I understand that I wasn't really breathing. This thing was breathing for me, giving me oxygen. And then they gave me some medicine, which now I know was Ativan, which is an anti-anxiety medicine. Within minutes, on my way to a Mesquite hospital, Memorial Hospital, I was fine. And we go to the hospital, and they run all these tests. So the doctor comes in, starts asking me questions which I thought were irrelevant. He says, okay, do you have anything that you've been done, that you're doing that's overwhelming? I said, no. And my roommate was with me, and the roommate says, well, he's a foreign student. I said, oh yeah, maybe he's missing home. You're missing home? And I said, I was when I first came, but now I'm fine. And then my roommate says, well, actually he's from Africa now. And he finished his 4-year degree in 2. The doctor who was holding his keyboard in his hand, he dropped it on the floor. He says, that's it. And I'm looking, what is he calling that's it? He says, you were stressed. That was a panic attack. So I know the panic attacks are real. So when it's in this part of the brain, it doesn't cause a panic attack. It causes a panic attack when it's in the other part of the brain that we talk about. But when it's here, it's this persistent belief that something is wrong with me, or something bad is going to happen, or constant worry, to where you can't convince this person to relax, because that part of the brain is always telling them, you've got to do this. If you don't do this, everything is going to fall apart. And once those beliefs and thoughts travel all the way into the front of the brain, now the person is acting out of that belief. For example, I had one lady who couldn't drive when it was raining because she believed that if you try to stop the car, it's going to hydroplane and you're going to hit something. Maybe she saw that happen once, or she read somewhere, but because she had a very anxious brain, she believed that, so she didn't drive when it rained. But here's the problem, she was a teacher. And they don't always tell you correctly when it's going to rain. Sometimes you don't know until it rains. So one time she's way up in McKinney, where she's teaching, and it's raining, and she's supposed to drive back to Dallas home. She's going, I'm not driving home. And so she calls the husband, he'll come to pick me up. Is your car broken down? No, it's not. It's when it's raining. Well, you can drive in the rain. No, I cannot. And they start arguing back and forth. And the husband calls me and said, I don't understand why she just doesn't drive. And I said, you don't understand. That's not how her brain works. Her brain really is convinced, I get in that car, I am going to wreck and die. So this is part of what happens there in this part of the brain, if it is this orange color. Now, the yellow-green is a whole different story. To understand the yellow-green, we have to, yellow-green, we have to understand the yellow and the green. It's a combination of those colors together. This comes from when people are raised in what I call a very strict upbringing, or maybe very religious, and the religion does not have to be Christianity. It's just very strict rules that you shouldn't break them. And it forces people to be very performance oriented. They have to perform in order to get accepted. So it brings another form of anxiety. The anxiety in the yellow-green is always about fear that I will displease God, or that I am going to do something that makes God unhappy. Or if it's a church, the church won't be happy with me because I haven't done this. This is the color that describes to me legalism. Legalism meaning just a collection of don'ts and do's, that if you do this, there's a check. If you don't do this, there's an X because you are messing up. It leads to what I call imprisonment inside one's mind when it's there. And when it's there, this person's belief system we're talking about here just does not end with them. They put it on everyone else. Sometimes when I'm talking to pastors or preachers and I see that in there, I get very concerned because I know that this pastor, chances are they are going to be putting their people on a performance thing. I remember listening to one preacher who was literally screaming from the pulpit because his people were not doing quiet time. I'm not thinking to myself, how do you know? I mean, do you pass out a list that says, I want to know when you do your quiet time and how long it is? I think he just wanted the people to really be doing those kinds of things. And that's legalism. Actually, there are sometimes it's a certain denomination, sometimes a certain faith that is built on this. And I know there are people who get out of those situations because they realize I cannot do it. This is too much. I want freedom. One of the things that I'm not the only one who's enjoyed this the last several weeks here at our church, going through the book of Galatians, because these Judaizers, they were the yellow-green people. They came into Galatia and trying to change all the yellows into yellow-green because they're trying to bring in this performance orientation to people. Then next to this is the yellow-orange, or the yellow-orange. There's anxiety about God. We know that the scriptures talk about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But it doesn't mean to being afraid of God. It means to revere God. There were times when I was a kid that I'll be afraid of my dad because I would have done something he said don't do, and I'm afraid what the consequences were. But there were times where I would not be afraid of my dad. I'll be in reverence to my dad. And I wasn't afraid of him. I respected him. And I wouldn't want to do something, not because of fear of punishment, I wouldn't want to do something that would make him not either be proud of me or make him not be good with me. Okay. Those are the differences. But the yellow-orange is not about revering God at all. It's a burden that says, I am so afraid because God is going to get me. The kinds of people who, when they look in parts of the Old Testament, they say, you see that God? He made the earth open up in the wilderness and swallowed those people. I mean, he is mean. And I don't ever want to cross that God because I'm afraid this is what he's going to do to me. And then to some of us who understand the new covenant that Jesus brought, we know that when you are in Christ, when you are in Jesus, you can do what those people did, that the earth opened up and swallowed them, and you won't get swallowed up. Why? Because that's what Jesus took away. It's like, no. Actually, the whole punishment thing that we read so much of it in the Old Testament, including some of the things the people had to do, kill those animals. We heard last Sunday how Abraham was asked by God to get all these animals, cut them so they could cut this covenant. All that was nullified when Jesus died. To tell the yellow-orange people this, it doesn't get in there. Because the yellow-orange says, oh, no. No. You are in serious trouble. It's the yellow-orange that make people, some people say, well, you are not really saved until you get there. Because when you are here, you might make mistakes and God is going to come and whack. Makes people think that, well, I don't understand why. No. There's no way that you get away with this. You get away with sin. They don't realize that, no, you didn't get away with sin. Jesus took away the sin, and that's why it doesn't land on you. So those are the negative thoughts and the negative beliefs. Now, before we get to 3, I think this may be a good time for us to take a short coffee and water break during his combat duties. He was shot at and got injured, and he recovered from the injuries, but we have a part of our brain that tells us when something goes wrong, if we are in danger. Sometimes that part of the brain tells us we are in danger when actually there is no danger. Sometimes it tells us there's danger when really there is danger. So when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, usually what happens is that part of the brain is saying, it's not saying you were in danger 6 months ago when you were in Baghdad. It's saying you are in danger now. So the reaction is disproportionate to it because there's nothing happening now. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I think today, because we're kind of staying on time, we'll be able to get, I want to give at least 10 minutes at the end of this for us to have a discussion or a time for people to ask questions. All right. So the third group, I call these disempowering thoughts and beliefs. Disempowering to me means not helpful, or the colors that represent that part of your brain is not helping you. It's sort of taking away something you should have. That's disempowering. Some of the colors I'm talking about here, they're disempowering because they are born out of trauma. Not all of them, but some are. The color pink. The color pink is a very necessary color for all human beings, because this is the brain's ability to feel things, to have emotions. If we didn't have emotions, we wouldn't be able to enjoy life. if we didn't have emotions, we wouldn't be able to relate. Imagine someone who has no emotions. I mean, they're not fun to be around. But on the other hand, imagine someone who is all emotions all the time. That too is not very helpful. So, what makes that color disempowering is not the color itself, but where it is. One of the examples in the book, um, I think we talked about it last week, of this pastor who had a lot of emotions, and he was making his decisions based on how he felt. Same problem with the guy we talked about today, who also was actually functioning out of his emotions. The problem with that is emotions don't tell us the truth. They may be valid, but you can't go by how it feels. Because feelings can change, and sometimes they can be way off. When I lived in Africa, I worked with a mission where we would distribute clothes and food to war-torn areas in the border with Mozambique and Zimbabwe. And the pilot of this little Cessna 180 that we used liked to help other missionaries, and as far as I know, I was the only local person who was flying with him. So he started teaching me how to fly. He let me hold, take the controls, and he would show me how to bank, show me how to go up, show me how to, he would show me all these things. And I did it so well to where he get to a point where he says, okay, now I need to teach you how to fly. And at some point in time, you may want to take flying lessons and get license, because we had no black pilot in the whole country. So he was hoping that maybe I could do this. And well, it's usually very sunny. You can see in Africa. And he says, well, if you want to have a license, you have to be able to use instruments. And what is that? He said, instruments are things that you rely on when you cannot see the ground. I said, oh, okay. Well, he wanted to show me what that meant. So he just said, okay, don't ask me any questions. And I think he took I forget what kind of cloth it was, and he covered the dashboard. He said, okay, remember how you bank left, bank right? Yeah, I said, can you do it right now? And I'm like, yes. And they said, well, what do you think will happen if you keep banking? I said, you keep going like this. I said, what about if you keep banking, you go like this? And I did that. And they said, walking, straighten. Okay, now I want you to tell me which direction are we flying? And we were coming from the border with Mozambique, we were going west to the hospital. And I said, we're going west. Are you sure? I said, yeah, we're going west. We left there, we're going west. And he took the dashboard and says, what does that say? It says east. It says, you see what happened? Your mind, you could not trust the way it feels. You feel like you're going where we're going. But when you're doing this, you're not aware that you change direction. You have to have. And I use that illustration a lot to say you cannot go by how things feel, because that's the problem with the pink when it's in that part of the brain. When it's in the hippocampus, that means your thinking, your beliefs, they're all going to be run by your emotions, and that's a very dangerous thing to do. Because an emotional decision is not going to last, because it's going to change. It changes as it changes with the feelings and the emotions. The other one is this red violet. Now that red violet actually is born out of trauma. What is the trauma in red violet? It's red violet trauma happens in two ways, one or two ways. The primary one is this child. It happens early in childhood. This child, for some reason, does not feel that mom really loves and nurtures them the way they need to. It doesn't mean that it's not happening. It means it's not happening according to the needs of this child. You parents who have more than one child, you probably know that none of your children were the same, right? In my big family, even today, I know that I was a very different child from all the others because I was very sick as a child. As a result, I had more needs for because I was sick. I needed to eat differently. I couldn't play outside with my brother because somehow, if I went outside, if I got cold, I'd get very sick. So that made my family have to pay more attention to me than they paid anyone else. If they had not done that, that would have created a deficit in me that would say something like this: nobody cares. My mom doesn't love me at all. If she loved me, she would have made me not feel very sick. Okay. So the red violet, when it starts showing up in there, that becomes a belief system. And I've seen this usually in married couples where one couple who with the red violet thinks that this husband or wife owes me the love and nurturing which is beyond what this person can do. Because why? Because now that person is becoming a mother. So that's one way it happens. The other way it happens is the flip side of this, where for some reason the mom really over attaches to that child. So now that child puts everything they have in the mom. And they don't think they have an existence outside of the mom. So they become really attached. So here's what happens. When that child grows up to be an adult, they don't want that mother to go anywhere because they feel like they don't exist. And the mom now is carrying this burden because it's almost like this child has not grown up. So those are the two ways that the red violet does. So when I see this in people, it's not just a matter of pointing out this what's happening. We have to come up with ways of saying, okay, we need to change this in very, very practical ways. So when we go in some of the parts of this brain, there's a lot of areas where we will be talking about this is how to deal with this if the red violet isn't there in your brain, in that part of the brain. The lime green, this happens when, for some reason, a child feels like they are not included in the family. They lack the sense of belonging. Usually, what happens is that the family or the parents are not really intentionally doing this. It's failing to see that this child somehow doesn't feel like they belong. They may be different in some way, and they need to be made to feel like they belong. The people with the lime green are so afraid of being rejected, and they would read a lot of things as rejection if they are not included. For example, they may go play with other kids, and the other kids are playing a team sport, and they're like, okay, let's choose people. Hey, you come, you come, you come. And usually, a lime green kid is already believing they're not going to pick me. So they're already sitting there away from it and sure they won't get picked. And when they leave, they conclude, yeah, nobody likes me. They are totally kicking me out. And it's super sensitive that comes with it, with the lime green. Now, light blue, on the other hand, is a sensitivity that's a good sensitivity when it's in other parts of the brain. Not here, because light blue is super sensitivity, and there's a proneness to feeling depressed or sad, especially when things don't go right. When it's in there, it's good when it's in other parts of the brain. That's what I mean by saying a color means the same thing, but when it's in a different part of the brain, the application of it may change. But light blue is one of those. Most of us who are in the service industry, like nurses, therapists, people like that, we are light blue people. We're very compassionate. And so what we have to watch for is we don't want to be light blue in our hippocampus, because then that's going to be dominant. It stops you from being reasonable. I had to learn this the hard way myself early on in my career. My light blue part wanted to make sure if people come into the hospital, actually when I worked in the hospital, when it came into my program, if they didn't have money to pay for their services, they should stay in the hospital. They shouldn't be left. And you can imagine how hospital administrators like me. They're going to, Dr. Mkatsi, no, you cannot do this because you need to be paid, your people need to be paid, the hospital need to be paid, you cannot do that. And I couldn't understand why. I'm going like, no, you cannot do that. You cannot let them go. We have to help them. And then I started doing that in my practice. I remember one time my adopted dad came to visit, and he was very impressed with everything that I was doing. And he says to me, I suppose we're making good money with this? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about it. What do you mean you're not sure about it? And my receptionist, my financial person says, well, I think there's probably upwards of $50,000 that's out there that's not collected because he wanted to reinforce it. That's light blue thinking. And obviously now when one thing I do know is I can tell when my light blue is creeping up, and I have to tell myself, no, this is not what we do. So that's light blue. So like I said, we don't have 15 minutes, but we have at least 8 minutes that we can take a few questions before we end. Unless you are one of those good classes where they don't have questions at all. Okay. Go ahead, Bill. Tim.